Someone has dusted off this like George Orwell draft of 1984 that even he went, well, that no one's going to buy this. It's too unbelievable. It's too dark. I don't really expect anything less from Victorian government at this point.
Hello and welcome to The View from 22. I'm Jon Connolly, the Spectator's news editor. I'm going to be talking today about a rather curious announcement from Victoria, Australia, where they've announced they're going to be putting in place a minister for changing men's behaviour. Joining me to discuss this is Terry Barnes, a contributor to Spectator UK and Spectator Oz, and Sall Grover, the CEO and founder of the women-only app Giggle, which is currently at the forefront of a legal battle over trans rights in Australia. As I mentioned there in the intro, the state of Victoria in Australia has just introduced a new minister for changing men's behaviour. Terry, can you tell us a bit about the position and what it involves?
Well, I'd like to tell you, John, but basically we don't know other than the title. Basically, the Premier of Victoria, a hard-left socialist Labor Premier named Jacinta Allen, has announced that there will be a minister or a parliamentary secretary, a junior minister for men's behaviour change. And beyond that, she says, well, we've got to look at men's behaviour and basically do something about the toxic nature of male behaviour and the risks it poses to women and children. And particularly, we've had a spate in Australia since the beginning of the year of, sadly, domestic violence-related deaths and murders. And I think that's galvanised the Premier. However, it's really a clickbait gimmick, isn't it? I mean, all we know is that the government has decided that it knows best, that it will actually create a job for a junior minister to tell men how to behave. But it doesn't really solve the problems of domestic violence in this country. It doesn't deal with the fact that that women as well as men are perpetrators of domestic violence. And it goes to the feminist myth that all men are basically perpetrators in waiting. They're violence machines waiting to spring their behaviour on unsuspecting women, partners, children, and so on. And it's just wrong. It's just crazy. But what it's doing, John, is trivialising a very serious social issue.
Sal, what was your reaction when you first heard about the position?
I thought it was a joke. I thought it was a parody Twitter account. I thought it was a joke. And then I found out that it was real. And every time stuff like this happens, we're all thinking the same thing. We're like, oh, someone has dusted off this like George Orwell draft of 1984 that even he went, well, that no one's going to buy this. It's too unbelievable. It's too dark. And then they're going, well, we'll give it the old college try. I don't really expect anything less from Victorian government at this point. They are, I mean, in a strong field of ridiculous governments in Australia, they do kind of are the most ridiculous. So anytime you're going to see the most ridiculous policy, if your instinct is, oh, it's come from Victoria, you're usually right.
I mean, Sal, to play devil's advocate slightly, I mean, I presume the head of Victoria would say, oh, well, you know, disproportionately the amount of violence against women is from men. Maybe we do need to change men's behaviour. Do you kind of agree with that at all?
Yeah, but this is why definitions and language are really important when we're talking about different issues. So, first of all, what is a man? I mean, these terms aren't even defined in law. So are they creating a policy that any man, or even a sort of a part of government that any man can actually identify out of? The Libertarian candidate, MP David Limbrick, did a great tweet in response to it, saying, okay, if you want to look at men's behaviour, what about these men? And it was trans activists in Melbourne just a week ago threatening women who were speaking about women's rights. So we're going to need some definitions here. Now, in terms of talking about domestic violence, I actually think domestic violence is the wrong framework to talk about it, to have an honest conversation, because you have male violence against women. And if we're having a conversation about male violence against women, that is what we're talking about. If we're talking about any sort of female violence or abuse against men, then that's what we're talking about. But they are actually two really separate issues. One of them is much more frequent, one of them not as frequent. Not to diminish it, but they are separate issues. So to put them together in this like domestic and family violence, even when they call it family violence, I think by the time you're in this violent situation, this is not family. The family unit is so broken that it's wrong to do that. So I understand that there are people who are trying to find solutions to this really, really complex problem. But I think assigning an Orwellian change men's behaviour secretary could not be the worst way. Like, you couldn't think of a worse way to do it than to do it that way. I do agree with what Terry is saying, that there is a huge danger in telling, especially like young boys and young men, that just being men is bad. That actually can create a situation as they grow older of hostility and animosity that can create violence. Being a man is not inherently a bad thing. Men are 50% of the population. And we like men to be protectors. We like them to be strong. There's lots of brilliant male traits. What we're talking about is predators. And then specifically in this context, male predators. If there's like an issue of females doing it, that's a different conversation, I think. I think it's wrong to confuse the two because they are very different issues.
Yeah, Terry, I want to bring you in on Sall's last point there, which is, what kind of message do you think this sends to young men growing up? I mean, you can't quite imagine it being done about any other demographic, can you? I mean, seeing a minister for women's changing women's behaviour, for example.
Well, they did actually appoint a bloke to be the minister for changing men's behaviour, but really, look, I think it sends a really bad message. It's basically saying, as I was saying before, that men are perpetrators in waiting, that they're inherently toxic, they're inherently dangerous, they're inherently nasty and feral, simply by the fact that they have a certain set of chromosomes. And look, I think no man is perfect, and I should know. My wife would certainly tell you. And we all struggle with relationships. We all struggle with moments that we really get stressed and might overreact in the wrong way. But it's important, I think, to accept that most men are decent, honourable people who try and do the right thing by women and children around them, who try and do the right thing by society as a whole in terms of their behaviour, and who frankly find relationship violence, domestic violence, call it what you will, they find it repugnant, absolutely repugnant. And if they struggle against their own instincts, that's a very natural and decent thing to do. And men are basically decent. Women are basically decent. To actually, as this gimmick has done, is to trivialise it, but also to really play to the same old feminist narrative in terms of women are all good, men are all bad. And I don't think that helps anybody at all.
Yeah, and Terry, in your piece, you mentioned a case. We probably can't talk about much about it because it's still ongoing, but there's a case in Tasmania which you say sort of flips this slightly on its head. Can you tell us a bit about that in sort of broad terms? Yes,
a former beauty queen who became a Labor Party MP, so Jacinta Allen, Victoria's own party, a woman called Catherine Hay, is up before the courts at the moment, alleged to have committed a decade's worth of emotional abuse on her male partner and the father of her child, which involved alleged incidents of physical assault. I mean, the point is that while Jacinta Allen, as Premier Victoria, has been going for this gesture politics and Twitter politics, there's really a case going on at the moment here that really highlights that men are not the sole perpetrators. Men are not the sole problem here. It's women and men in relationships ensuring or striving and struggling sometimes to get it right. But sometimes the instinct of women to abuse and be violent is just as same and just as dangerous as it is for men. And I think we have to accept that there is woman on man violence in relationships and in domestic situations just as much as there is, well, actually not so much in terms of prevalence, but certainly it's happening. I heard some statistics here in Australia suggest it's at least 1 in 4 men have experienced what would be termed a domestic violence episode. So the fact is, human nature being what it is, we all struggle against it, but most of us do manage it, and most of us do the right thing by those around us and those who we care about and love.
Sal, do you agree with that point? Do you think this sort of position trivialises possibly violence against men sometimes as well?
This was actually the one part of Terry's article that I really disagreed with for a few reasons. One, as I stated before, we're talking either about male violence against women or we're talking about female violence or abuse against men. So they're actually really different issues. And when you can pinpoint one case of a woman doing it and we hold that up, it's not enough to really make any sort of valid comparison against, I think it's like a woman every few days at this point. I don't know what the days are. It was one woman every 6 days a little while ago, but I think it's even more than that now. So I don't think that it's an equal comparison at all. I think that there is deep-rooted misogyny just sort of in society. This sort of always has been. At the end of the day, there's always going to be male violence, or there's always going to be bad people, both male and female. We actually, as a society, have to work out how we coexist with that, because when you bring in just like sort of this guy to be the man of men's behavioral change, like what's he actually going to do? But the male psychopaths who have no regard for authority, are they going to listen to him? I don't think so. Like, what's their plan? Put some billboards up saying "Don't rape or beat your wife." Is that going to work? Like, what's their plan? Are they going to ban porn? Because that'd actually be a really good thing. Are they going to take on the entire porn industry and get rid of that so that men no longer see women being degraded and abused in the palm of their hand on their phone multiple times a day? I can't imagine it. Are they going to tackle the trans activist abuse against women who are just trying to speak? I don't think so, especially with the Labor government. It's definitely not part of their overall policy. So I agree with Terry in the sense that this is so tokenism. It's so nonsense. It's just like giving one guy a job. And he's a very lovely man who has just been given this position. I'm not begrudging him necessarily. I'm just saying that the best thing to do to combat any sort of, like we're going to call it domestic violence, is to make sure that the victims of it can leave as quickly and easily as possible. And then once there's not a victim there for them to be able to abuse, the first part of the problem has been solved. And so I think that when we're going to try and do anything, that should be the first port of call of really putting in initiatives, incentives, making stuff as easy as possible for people to be able to get out, and then we can go from there. But again, that's a difficult thing. This is a difficult issue to work out.
Yeah, and it definitely does seem simplistic. I mean, isn't that the key thing, Terry, which is that, any policy that this sort of minister comes up with, the men who are actually violent aren't going to listen to. So who is it for?
Well, that's right. And I think the fact that she has appointed a man to do the job is actually going to get the feminist lobby offside as well. But going back to what Sal just said, I mean, my point about making that comparison with that Tasmanian case is that we talked about good men and good women, but there are also bad women as well as bad men. So I think we just have to remember that these types of situations, relationships and the things that go on with them takes two to tango. And certainly if a good man ends up being abused by a bad woman, that is wrong. And we have to accept if you're a man, you're going to do harm. If you're a woman, you're going to be harmed. I think that's really behind all of this. And the fact that it's been trivialised in such a way that position has been announced in the way that the Premier of Victoria tweeted it, as if she'd done some wonderful thing, I just think was absolutely extraordinary. And as Sal said, I did a double take too, and actually you drew my attention to it, John. And I thought it was a Titania McGrath tweet actually when I first saw it. So. This sort of nonsense does not help a very serious problem here, and we have to deal with it seriously. We have to deal with it responsibly, but we also cannot assume that government can just step in and tell us how to do it. I think this is where we have to step up as individuals in a relationship and out of it, and do the right thing by everyone else, but also where there's a problem, that we deal with it and take responsibility for our own actions.
Brilliant. I think that's all we've got time for. Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Sal, for coming on. That was brilliant.